Hello and welcome again to this edition of Capital Dateline. I'm your host, Brad Swanson. We are here in Florida's capital, and we are supposed to be in the last week of session. So I'm joined today by Jim Saunders, the executive editor of the News Service of Florida, to give us the latest and up-to-date news about where the legislature is in the process and where we're going to finish. Jim, welcome.
I think supposed to be is the operative word, supposed to be.
That's why I used it. All right. So, Jim, so talk to us a little bit. When we came in Monday, we had a lot of things that looked like in the next 48 hours they were going to be solved. Some have been sent to the governor. Other things the gears look like they kind of ground to a halt. So where do we stand on budget and the big issues of the final week?
Well, I mean, the budget, basically they needed to get a budget done by Tuesday night, and they couldn't do it. So we're going to have to go into overtime, whether that be an extension of this session or a special session to actually finish a budget for the fiscal year. I mean, they kind of pushed up as far as they could in terms of the deadlines of getting a deal done. They needed it to be done on Tuesday because there's a 72-hour cooling off period that's required before they can vote on the budget. And they couldn't get it done by Tuesday night. And early Tuesday evening, Senate President Joe Negron told reporters, you know the timelines as well as we do. We're not going to have it done. So at this point, it looks like a major issue is healthcare funding. There's about $650 million in cuts to hospitals through the Medicaid program, and they're trying to figure out how to sort that out in terms of how to distribute those cuts, or sort of the structure of the cuts, which is important because there's winners and losers, if you will, in how that's done. Yeah. And there's divisions between the House and the Senate how to do that. That's one example of the issues that are out there.
Before we move off of that one, how much money are we talking about on just that one healthcare piece?
Well, it's a $250 million hit to the state general revenue. When you bring in federal matching funds, it's $651 million. So it's a large chunk of change. Healthcare is always a difficult budget issue for them to resolve, partly because the budget is so large and so complex. Another issue that's just hanging out there is whether and when and how the state's going to get a bunch of money through what's called the LIP program, the Low Income Pool program, which could help alleviate some of these cuts to hospitals. At this point, they don't have the deal done on that either with the federal government. So that's one of the major sticking points that we're hearing about a lot. There may be a lot of other smaller budget issues that the House and Senate are feuding about, if you will. At this point, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. The talk around the Capitol yesterday was that they would still try to get a budget done by the end of this week and then come back early next week and extend the session into early next week and vote it out. Well, we don't know that for sure, and it's possible they may have to come back for a special session after, take a couple weeks off and come back. They've done that before.
All right, so let's move from the budget now, because that is the absolute gorilla in the room, and let's start talking about the biggest issues of the week. When we last talked to you on Monday, it was gambling, marijuana, and a few other key bills. Where do we stand from Monday to today?
Well, the other big development I think yesterday in terms of issues dying was the gambling issue. Basically, they called off the negotiations, killed the conference committee. They basically couldn't reach a deal on gambling. It was always going to be difficult to reach a deal on gambling. It is. Every time this comes up, and most of the times it fizzles out earlier than this year, but they couldn't reach a deal. One of the major sticking points on that issue was that the Senate wanted to allow slot machines in 8 counties where voters have approved slot machines in referendums. The House did not want to allow that, and the House has traditionally been less favorable to expanded gambling. So that was one of the points of contention. But one of the other issues that I think is important to remember is one of the reasons they were talking about gambling deal this year was that they were wanting to reach a new agreement with the Seminole tribe on gambling, which would have given the tribe the ability to offer some games they can't now, but it also would have brought in a whole lot of money for the state. So that issue is unresolved. There's a court fight going on between the state and the Seminoles at this point that's unresolved. The Seminoles won it at one level. It's been appealed. So, I mean, that's an issue that is just sort of left on the table with the gambling talks going down. I think a couple other notable things, though, that did get done this week and are finalized. Yesterday, the the Senate, well, it's a Senate priority, Senator President Negron's priority of a water plan down to build a reservoir south of Lake Okeechobee. That passed yesterday. That was a big point of contention during the session. Big priority for the Senate president, and they worked out a deal. The House passed it, the Senate passed it. It's going to the governor, and from all signs, I think the governor will probably go along with it. The other thing that passed this week was a proposed constitutional amendment that was a big priority of Speaker Corcoran on to expand the homestead exemption by $25,000. This is could be a big tax cut if voters approve it in 2018. Again, this was not a big issue early in session, but it really emerged as the session went along as a major priority of the speaker. And it got through the Senate this week. There was some question whether they'd have enough votes to get through the Senate. It got through, and then of course it passed the House, pretty overwhelmingly. So I think you got to look at what passed and what didn't. I mean, there's two sides of what's been going on here this week.
Right. So we got 3 days left, and marijuana looks like it had some traction, and then workers' comp. Do you mind sharing with our viewers a little bit about both of those issues?
Well, the House passed a medical marijuana bill Tuesday, and it's coming back to the Senate. It'll be taken up Wednesday in the Senate. And they've been moving closer and closer on that issue, and I tend to think it'll get resolved this week. There are issues out there about how many nurseries will have licenses. This is a big money issue, a lot of lobbying going on about it, but everybody sees this industry is really growing in the state. But
no pun intended.
Well, that's true too. But that is an issue that's moving at this point. Workers' comp is a little bit harder to judge at this point. The House passed its bill a couple weeks ago, and it's it's supposed to have been coming up in the Senate on Monday and Tuesday this week. Hasn't come up. They're probably trying to work a deal, but the business community, while they would accept the House bill, they're not exactly overwhelmingly crazy about that, and they definitely don't like the Senate bill. And the major issues are attorney's fees for lawyers who represent injured workers, what limits should be on those fees. And the other issue is that the Senate's unhappy that the House wants to cut workers' comp insurance reimbursements to hospitals and ambulatory surgical centers that care for injured workers. The House wants to, one of the ways they want to save money in the system is to cut those reimbursements, and the Senate doesn't want to do that. So there's probably, as we understand it, two big issues out there that need to be resolved.
So any other large issues that you're going to be paying attention to, or that we as viewers should be paying attention to between now and Friday?
Well, one issue that's probably going to get resolved too is carrying out. There was a solar constitutional amendment that passed last year. That looks like it may get resolved. There was some differences about that between the House and the Senate early in session. There's a lot of other issues out there that are kind of well, for one thing, there's school issues too. As part of the budget discussions, they have to resolve some issues about Speaker Corcoran's priorities on the Best and Brightest Teacher Bonus Program, also on his Schools of Hope charter school program. They need to still work out some of the details on that. There's also a bill coming up in the Senate today on testing. There's been a lot of debate about whether standardized testing should be sort of reeled back in a little bit. And there's going to be debate in the Senate probably today on that issue. So there's issues like that out there. I'm not sure that some of them are the make or break issues of the session, like we've seen the budget and some of these other issues. But they're big deals. They're important issues.
Yeah, these last 2 days before what is supposed to be the last day, which would be Friday, this is the housekeeping kind of time, and it's how much time do they have while they're in their chambers to move through the bills, have the discussion, and keep moving. So,
well, strangely, I think taking gambling off the table and buying a little bit more time on the budget, I think it might help things move a little bit more smoothly. The Senate took 2 long recesses yesterday, and we know that there was a lot of behind-the-scenes discussions going on in the budget. But they've gotten themselves a little bit more time on that, so maybe bills will start moving a little bit more smoothly, particularly in the Senate where things have been kind of stop and start.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for telling us what's happening right now today. I know it's going to be another fast and furious 48 hours before we get to talk to you next. We'll encourage our viewers to tune into your news feeds to see the latest of what's happening in the Capitol. Thanks.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, that's all the time we have for today's Capitol Dateline. Please tune into our Facebook feed at Capitol Dateline Online or connect with us at Twitter at the FCTA. Thanks for tuning in.